I'm Claudia Catania, and you're listening to Playing on Air. You are about to hear Owner Occupy by Jonathan Spector, a playwright based in Oakland, California. It features David Patrick Kelly of Twin Peaks and Broadway's Once, David Furr, Tony nominee for Broadway's Noises Off, and Kalyne Coleman of Lessons in Survival. They are directed by Taibi Magar, Obie winner for Is God Is. And now, Owner Occupy.
This is what I remember. Mia wanted to bake him cookies, which I was a little offended by, since she'd never baked me cookies. Not once. Not on my birthday. Never. But she was excited because...
We'll have real neighbors again.
It was a very kind gesture, but I'm not eating sugar right now. A few years ago, I watched a very convincing YouTube video about how your body treats sugar as a poison.
The people who'd bought it before had split it into 4 units and AirBnB'd them out. And Mia went over and introduced herself right when he moved in and came back and said...
He's planning on really living there, not just renting it out.
So I guess this fella was unsplitting it?
The realtor told me a lot of people looking for single-family homes had been scared off of this one because you basically have to gut it. But it had good bones, and I wanted to keep as much of that as I could. I'm working with this just genius architect, and she found a way to allow me to live in the basement unit while they're doing the work. And then once they finish the upstairs, I'll move up and they'll work on the basement. They start early, 6 a.m. most days, which I have a bit of guilt about just in terms of the noise for the neighbors. It doesn't bother me, personally. Once I'm out, I sleep the sleep of the dead. But I know not everyone is so blessed.
Now, Mia had been renting my in-law unit in the back for a couple of years at this point. She was a great tenant, always paid the rent on time. And sometimes, if she'd cooked herself some dinner and had too much, she'd knock on the back door and see if I wanted some of the leftovers, which I appreciated because I'm not much of a cook myself. Though one thing Mia had never done was make me cookies. But as soon as this fella bought the house, and he was barely ever there, as far as I could tell...
I work odd hours. Not odd for the startup world, but odd for civilians. Though, with a lot of our young programmers, as long as we keep the fridge stocked with Rockstar energy drink, they'll work through the night. You can do that when you're in your 20s, which is why I am rarely up and about when the sun is up. So having a friendly neighbor who can keep an eye on the place is a real gift.
I'd say from age 11 to maybe 15. I always thought when I grow up, I'd live in a small town. I read all the Anne of Green Gables books like 3 times each, and then I read a bunch of Stephen King. My uncle was the only person in our family who was a big reader, and every time we go visit them, he'd send me home with a book. And when I turned 12, he said, "Now, you're ready for the good stuff." And he gave me a copy of The Stand, which is a weird book to give a 12-year-old because it's like 1,000 pages long and pretty bleak. Plus, there's a bunch of weird sex stuff, but I liked it. And he gave me more, and most of them were all set in a small little town in Maine. And I thought that would be nice, just to walk down the street to the grocery store and everybody knows you and knows your family.
Now, when Mia had first moved in, my stepson Carl, that's my second wife Noreen's son, she passed a few years back, he was giving me a hard time, like, "You just want to have this pretty young lady around your house?" And I said, "No, sir, I've got me a lady," which I did, this widow up in Orinda. I've been seeing on and off for a couple of years.
And because we moved around so much when I was a kid, I always thought it'd be nice to just really know your neighbors, you know? Like, the 2 times my mom was stationed in places where we lived on the base, it was definitely that feel of like, you know everybody. And I always wanted that.
We used to have neighbors on the other side, nice couple, Dolores and Tom, but they moved to Boulder, which is in Colorado. I guess you get more for your money out there, and now whoever bought it is just holding it. I don't know if it's a person or a company or a Saudi prince or what, but it's just sitting there, empty, all the time, and that's a sad sight.
So when Soren moved in, I decided to make him cookies.
It was Terry across the street who first talked to me about the rats. He said he used to be in construction. It's pretty common that when someone goes digging, that disturbs a bunch of rats, and they all scatter and end up in the nearby houses. And he felt like maybe this new Swedish guy ought to take some responsibility about it. I don't know for sure if he was Swedish. I'd never met him. But I asked Mia, and she'd said,
I think Finnish I didn't ask, but the accent sounded like a cross between Russian and French, and I think that makes it Finnish?
Now, I'd never met a Finnish person.
Could be Icelandic, though.
People tell me that a lot, that my accent is hard to place. I've spent time in all the Nordic countries, so at this point even I have no idea what my English sounds like.
So Terry's the one who suggested we have a little neighborhood meeting, and he was saying we should get him to pay to have an exterminator come, set traps all up and down the block. I said that sounded pretty expensive, and I didn't know if we could ask him to do that, but he went ahead and held the meeting. I didn't go, though I heard Marvin was there from the corner house, and Tanya, who just had a baby, and Doug and Denisha, because that's all the neighbors we got left on the street. Every other house is either getting ready to be flipped or it's an Airbnb.
I went to the meeting because Alvin was having one of his episodes.
4 or 5 times a year.
He's basically a great landlord, but every once in a while he gets really weird, and I know he just needs some space.
That's it, tops. My philosophy is you do heroin more than 5 times a year, it can start to become a problem. Less than that, you're fine. My doctor and I don't see eye to eye on this, and he says, Al, you're 83 years old. You do heroin, it could kill you. And I say, Dr. Brickman, I'm 83 years old. Anything could kill me. And he'll say, not everybody has the constitution of Keith Richards. And I ask him if it's true that Keith Richards used to get blood transfusions before he'd go on tour. That you take out all the heroin blood and put in fresh young blood, and it helps you kick it for a while. But Dr. Brickman was skeptical that that could work. Now, I had a pretty good relationship going with a couple of the folks that live under the overpass a few blocks away. It had become a large encampment over the past year or so. But I'd been friendly with them since it was just a few folks, so nobody ever gave me any trouble. And Jimmy Callum, who'd been there the longest, was a real stand-up guy and would always find someone who could help me out. Despite what the politicians would have you believe, it's actually a small minority of folks in the encampment who are addicts. Most just had a run of bad luck. Some had mental health issues, but there's usually a couple of them that are, and that's just a fact. But this time, when I went there, turned out nobody'd seen Jimmy in a few weeks. Somebody else was able to get me what I needed, but still, I was a little worried about Jimmy.
The meeting was basically a lesson in world-class NIMBYism. Like they couldn't even see that Soren was actually trying to help things by converting it back into a single-family home. I think they were mainly upset because of A, the fact that Soren had never taken the time to introduce himself, B, the fact that he drove a Tesla.
It's an indulgence, but it's very good for the environment.
And C, the fact that none of them got invited to the party.
We had just received some Series A funding, and our people worked so hard that they deserved to enjoy themselves. I, and this is of course my fault, forgot that if you say to a 24-year-old, feel free to bring friends, many of them will bring their whole gang. So we ended up with nearly 100 people.
Normally, going to a party with a bunch of tech bros would be just above taking my eyes out with a fork, so when I agreed to go, it was with 2 ideas in mind. 1, I would drink their craft beer and eat the food catered by Chez Panisse. And 2, I would tell them how they are a parasite on this community.
I'm used to dealing with people's preconceptions. It doesn't bother me.
But I was surprised. The people there, they were actually pretty thoughtful about the systems they were participating in.
We're very selective in our hiring.
And also, funny. Soren, most of all.
I was visiting my lady friend in Orinda that weekend, so only heard about this later.
And we got into this really deep conversation about...
It's not just automation. It's really a question of, if you take as a given that wealth and power are going to accumulate exponentially in any open system,
which I didn't,
then what's on us is, how do we still make a world that minimizes suffering for the most people?
We were so wrapped up in our conversation, I didn't even notice when the party had tipped from just a bunch of enthusiastic conversation to being a bit of a rager.
Terry told me he saw somebody throw a beer bottle out the front window, and that it shattered in the street right at his feet where he was walking his dog.
Which he's probably just making up.
Which he probably could be just making up. You never know with Terry.
The police were very polite, which, let's just acknowledge, is not unconnected to my complexion. I apologized, they apologized, I thanked them, they thanked me. We asked everyone to keep it down, and that was the end of that.
Now, the other problem with the cheap heroin is sometimes I have a bit of a skin reaction. It's nothing too visible, but I do start to exude an odor. It's just a fact.
I'd say it was like if you think of the smell of cooked broccoli that you've had in the fridge for 2 weeks and have started to turn funky, that plus a kind of chlorine smell.
The doctor couldn't figure it out. He gave me a cream.
It didn't help.
He gave me a gel.
It didn't help.
He gave me some pills.
Which made it worse.
Finally, he said, maybe you should just buy some good cologne and try to mask it.
I seriously considered moving. It was wafting all the way out of his house into my place.
Nothing helped. So I progressed from colognes to perfumes. The cheap ones were worthless, but then I found an expensive one, and poof, odor, gone. Not just covered up, neutralized.
Thank God. I was ready to die.
I experimented a bit. Not every perfume would do it. Turns out it was only the ones made with ambergris, which is a kind of whale vomit. Now, I got a bottle of Estee Lauder for $79.99, a few spritzes for a few days, and everything's hunky-dory again.
I have an extremely delicate olfactory apparatus.
A couple pieces of mail had gotten accidentally delivered to our place, and I went over, as you do, neighborly-like.
It's nothing personal.
It was actually my first time meeting Soren.
An involuntary response.
He sees me, takes a big whiff in. I thought he was going to compliment me on it. People do that sometimes. Instead, he just turns purple, spins around, vomits. I don't even know what. I ask him if he's okay, if he needs any help. He just says,
No, the smell.
So I leave. I don't take it personal. Anyway, by the next evening, I was back on track, body odor-wise, and I went over to see how he's feeling. We had a nice chat. He poured me a Scotch.
I didn't inquire about that awful smell. A person should never be forced to explain their most disgusting aspects.
Now, I'm not much of a Scotch drinker, so I couldn't tell you how fancy it was. He explained it to me.
It was one of only 7 remaining bottles from an isle off the coast of...
I don't remember all the details, but I know it was just one of the nicest chats I'd had in a while.
I am an excellent drinking companion.
But at one point, I asked to use the bathroom and kind of use it as an excuse to have a look-see around the place like you do. The main floor where we were in was still only half done. Drywall, exposed, what have you. I took a look downstairs, because that's where he was living at the time, and it's the strangest thing. It hadn't been worked on at all. Totally unfinished. Wires hanging, dirt floor. Definitely not a part of the house one has been sleeping in since June. I think it could be that he's only pretending to live here since the sale, but hasn't actually moved in yet. Maybe some kind of owner-occupancy tax situation.
For technical reasons which are much too boring to go into, and which I myself don't even fully understand, it's legally owned by the startup, to whom I pay rent, which is then returned to me in the form of salary. My attorney assures me this is fully above board.
Ain't none of my business either way.
Things had been pretty intense at work for a few weeks, so I hadn't even noticed that Alvin and Soren were spending so much time together.
I'm an excellent drinking companion.
I'm a paralegal at the Homeless Action Network. It's hard and we're overworked and underfunded, but the work is so important. To be able to actually make a difference in a person's life, get someone off the street, or get the medical attention they need.
She's got a big heart.
This is a big part of my loathing of the tech people. I mean, I'm not saying that each of them individually are responsible for the collective immiseration of the housing insecure, but it's not their fault. They show up in these communities, blow up the housing market, and then get annoyed that people are living on the street because they can no longer afford the rent.
She could get a little preachy sometime, but you know, that's also just called being a young person.
So, of course, we've just been in constant crisis mode for the past 2 years. We don't have the resources. The number of housing insecure was just rising so fast each month. And in the past few months, the population started, pretty rapidly declining, which was super weird.
I'd noticed that. It wasn't just Jimmy. A whole bunch of folks seemed to be gone and left their tents behind and everything.
We figured it had to be some kind of secret city action, but they denied it, so we were filing all kinds of lawsuits, FOIA requests, and then just like that, poof, I get laid off. which was total BS. Like, I made a quarter of what the attorneys make, and I did 3 times the work. So, yeah, I got pretty depressed, started drinking a lot.
I am an excellent drinking companion.
And Soren offers me a job, which, like I would have told you, that I'd rather have my fingernails removed with a machete than work for a tech startup. But here I was.
I was happy for her. All that moping. It was maybe 3 weeks of moping. Any amount of moping is bad as far as I'm concerned.
And they have free lunch and kombucha on tap. And the fridge is just fully stocked with Rockstar energy drinks.
She was an easy hire. The people who most want what you have to offer are the ones you should be most reluctant to give it to, and vice versa. So, naturally.
But what really clinched it was, and I didn't get this at first, like I thought the app they were developing was just all about laying the groundwork for UBI, Universal Basic Income. But it's much more holistic than that. And there's a whole part of it that's directing resources to people experiencing homelessness, getting them support. Things were going really well.
Things were going well.
I am an excellent drinking companion.
I'd go next door a couple times a week, have a scotch.
I didn't see Soren at the office that much. He was mostly out meeting with investors, I think.
I keep odd hours.
And honestly, it was just a way better job. I had a 401k and dental, like good dental, like covering root canals and everything.
You must take care of your teeth.
Terry still complained now and again, but it was easy to tune him out.
The neighborhood was changing, but it wasn't all bad.
You just say, "Thanks for letting me know, Terry. I'll have a think on it," and he'll leave you alone for a while.
And I was happy.
Was I telling you about Patricia, our mail lady? Sweet as can be, but should have retired 5 years ago. Couldn't barely read the addresses anymore. She was hanging on for her pension, though, which I don't begrudge her.
This kind of thing is much less of a problem in socialized systems, which I've seen firsthand, having spent a lot of time in Nordic countries.
Rosalie, that's my lady in Orinda. She's taken to sending me little gifts in the mail. She may have got a bit of an Etsy addiction between you and me. So I just tore the package open without even looking at the label, figuring it's from her. But instead, inside, there were this, what do you call them? Vials, like test tubes, some kind of dark stuff in there. Now, this was also one of my heroin days, so normally I don't like to leave the house. But I didn't think this should be sitting out in the sun on someone's porch, so I managed to put my shoes on and do a few spritzes of Estee Lauder and then walked next door to Soren's house. That's who it was addressed to. I knocked, even though I know he's not usually home at that time. But like I said, I didn't want to leave it out on the porch, so I went and got the spare key I still have from 2 owners back. Nobody ever changes locks. I don't know why. I went inside, figuring I'd just stick this in his fridge and leave him a note. And then, for whatever reason, I thought, let me just go see if he's home down in the basement. It's pretty dark down there, and so I'm using my phone as a flashlight, and it's not so easy to see. Plus, I'm a little wobbly from the heroin. At first, I don't see nothing. Like I said, some hanging wires, some dirt floor. Then something starts moving. It could be mice or rats, and I shine the light over there, and, well, it's not rats. It's like, maybe it's a whole swarm of insects, because what it actually looks like is the dirt floor itself is moving, and then a hand comes up out of there, and I'm thinking, damn, they must have cut this with something bad. But then it's a whole body that sits up and turns to me, and it's Soren. But he was in the dirt, and he opens his mouth wide, and I kid you not, there's 4 big old long fangs, and he starts moving towards me, but like fast, and I start scrambling up the stairs, but not as fast as he's coming. And then when he gets to the bottom of the stairs, just like as far away from me as I am from you, he gets that look again from before and just starts vomiting. But he sure do hate that smell of Estee Lauder. And I take that as my cue. When I get home, I lock the door, I look myself in the mirror, and I say, Al, maybe it's finally time to stop doing heroin.
When I got home from work, Alvin was sitting on the back porch seeming particularly weird. Even for him. I thought maybe he needed to go to the ER or something. I was worried about him.
I was worried about him also.
I tried calling Rosalie, that's his lady friend, which, cone of silence, I'm like 50% sure is his euphemism for prostitute, but he tells me she's on a cruise and won't be back for 10 days.
I say, whatever you do, don't go over there.
So, I go over there.
I was glad she came, and that I had the chance to clear up our little misunderstanding.
We talked. I had some scotch. He explained things.
I am an excellent drinking companion.
And I came back, ready to tell Alvin what had happened.
She was very pale.
But when I started to explain, he wouldn't listen. He just... Honestly, I was worried I was maybe seeing the early signs of dementia. He was just kind of raving.
I'd never really understood the word thrall. Like, I've never had the occasion to use thrall in a sentence. But it seemed like she was maybe, well, in his thrall.
By that point, I'd had a bit too much to drink, so I just crashed.
And I can't be certain, but it did look like she had 2 little marks on her neck.
Next day, I had a crazy hangover, so I took half a day off. We had unlimited personal days, which is pretty sweet.
First thing in the morning, I called Terry, and Terry called the meeting. Marvin was there from the corner house, and Tanya, who just had a baby, and Doug and Denisha, and he told me to tell them what I told him. So I told them. I said, I think maybe we have a vampire on the block. Tanya just picked up her baby and walked right out, which I don't blame her. But the rest of us stayed and talked it out, and we all agreed that somebody ought to do something about it. Terry claimed he'd had a bunch of experience with vampires when he was living in Houston, but who knows if that's true, because Terry liked to say a lot of things. So we took a vote, an anonymous ballot, and lucky me, I won.
Have you ever read this Steven Pinker book, Better Angels of Our Nature? It's a very important work. It makes the argument that we've had this massive decline in the amount of violence that we inflict on each other, going back centuries. And even if you look at a society from history that we now think of as being pretty peaceful, they would have had what we would now consider an extremely high murder rate. He attributes this decline to a couple of things: the consolidation of power and the use of force in the state, rather than feudal lords, and also how the spread of commerce gives people an incentive to cooperate. And finally, that bringing women fully into political society has a pacifying effect as well. And I think it's easy to poke holes in this argument, just as you can poke holes in any historical, sociological theory. But all in all, I find it pretty convincing. And it certainly holds true among my people. It's like I was listening to a podcast recently where they were discussing Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's plantation, on how now on the tour they make a special point of telling you about the dumb waiter in the dining room, and how the function of it was to allow the food to be delivered without guests actually seeing the enslaved people who prepared the food, since Jefferson, in his diplomatic capacity, hosted any number of foreign dignitaries, and those dignitaries would have been horrified by the barbarity of slavery had they seen it close up. So Jefferson occluded it. And the point of all this was that we can't just let him off the hook by saying everyone was doing it, so no one knew it was wrong. Jefferson must have known that slavery was wrong because he felt the need to hide it. I think it's the same for a lot of my peers. We were held back from trying to make any real change in the system because, well, there's so much judgment. And the fear that if we're doing things differently now, it's because we acknowledge that the way we used to do them was problematic at best. So people experience a real sense of shame around, say, having once devoured an entire village in a single night. But that's exactly what makes this space so ripe for disruption.
Everybody had recommendations: holy water, garlic, a cross. I mean, I'm a Unitarian, so who knows? The one thing was, he hated the Estee Lauder. I think it was the whale vomit. That was the key, so I doused myself up and down. I trimmed a piece of one by from the shed into a nice steak and headed next door. I knocked, a courtesy, and after a long while, I hear the lock turn. I grip my steak. The door swings open, and standing there is Jimmy Callum, my hookup from the encampment under the overpass. Jimmy!
And I know what you must be thinking. Did you really need venture capital funding? Couldn't you have just gotten whatever money you needed from your own people? To which the answer is yes, of course. And absolutely not. Because it was important to me that we be taken seriously, and that if we succeed, it's because we're succeeding in the marketplace of ideas, and not just resting on my vampiric privilege.
Now, Jimmy looks, I gotta say, he looks great. Healthy, rosy-cheeked, and way, way less gaunt. He invites me in, pours me a scotch. I'm like, Jimmy, are you sure you're okay? And he says, better than I've been in a long, long while. I ask him where he's been. How come he left his tent behind and everything? He said he has his own place now, downtown. It's small, but it's all he needs. A lot of the folks from the encampments are living there apparently. Each got their own little apartments. The city pays for this, I ask. Nah, he says. Your neighbor here, working with him. I'm like, Jimmy, are you programming computers?
There's a way in which all we're trying to do is build a better mousetrap. It's a question of supply and demand. And our real insight was that we were looking at this problem completely backwards. The question wasn't, how do we find enough people willing to fulfill our needs? It should be, where is there a population that needs what we have to offer?
I've never seen a facility so well run. Nice rooms, cafeteria with healthy choices and all organic produce, mental health and substance abuse counselors on site 24/7. And the app was very well designed, so really, their only responsibility was to make sure they kept their phones on. They get a text, and then it's just 15 minutes of their time, 2-3 times a week, and they get to have rich, fulfilling lives. And this facility is just a pilot program. They're still beta testing everything, making improvements.
So Jimmy was like, look, I know it sounds crazy to say something is better than heroin, but this, it's better than heroin.
Oh, yes. This is an interesting tidbit most people do not know. The experience of being fed on is actually quite pleasurable for the donor. The areas of the brain that lights up during an MRI is the same ones activated from morphine. This is why, traditionally, we always had to be careful about feeding on the same person too frequently. They'd begin to form an attachment to you and can exhibit addictive behavior. And soon enough, you just have this horde of followers jonesing outside your castle, and that would tip the locals off that something a little untoward may be happening. Now, money is not generally an issue for my people. The secret to having a lot of it is simply to stick around long enough. It tends to accumulate. There's a reason most of the wealth in this country is inherited wealth. On the other hand, there are people for whom money is an issue. This is why the sharing economy is so revolutionary. Our task is simple. We just use technology to randomly facilitate an equal and honorable exchange.
So at this point, I'm still gripping my stake pretty tightly. I'm still committed. And if it came to it, Jimmy's a skinny fella. I don't think he could stop me. But instead, he just says that Soren is deeply sorry about any misunderstanding and would love to chat. But he does need me to wash off the smell first. And I follow him down the hall. Turns they'd finished work on the bathroom. And, woo boy, now that was a luxury bathroom. His and her shower heads, the kind that reach out over the top so they rain on you. And the shower had a temperature gauge on it so you could make it just precisely as hot as you'd like it. Real beauty. And there were towels and a change of clothes already laid out, so what was I going to do?
And now that we're really beginning to accumulate some robust data sets, I mean, seriously, we used to be in the dark ages. We didn't even know, for instance, how much blood the average vampire consumes in a month. There's so much variation from one to the next. What you need is big data. And now that we have that, well, we're starting to be able to reconsider a lot of our previously held assumptions.
Look, when you're right, you're right. Terry had to be taken care of, obviously. No, not like that. He received an offer on his house so good he just couldn't refuse. And I know he'd said he'd never sell, but Terry says a lot of things, and the neighborhood was changing. Nothing anyone could do to stop it.
What's so visionary is, I think, like, okay, you know Google's motto is, or was, don't be evil, which, fine. But how do you do that? Like, how do you even know if you're moving in the right direction? It's so subjective. Whereas we are saying our job is to alleviate the most suffering for the most people. Now that is something you can do.
One of the other convenient things is when someone is being fed on regularly, they become very receptive to new ideas. So generally, the people we work with are free to go about their day as they please. But if we were to say to someone, we could really use your help driving a city bus today, or they need a few more janitorial staff over at the electrical plant, people are more than happy to help. Truly happy. And as we scale up, I foresee a world where more and more people every day can be brought into vampirism. And complementing that, more and more people will work together with them to lead healthy, happy, safe lives where all their needs are met. And I know what you're going to say. I know. All this central planning sounds so very Soviet. It's doomed to fail. And you're right. But this is the genius of the algorithm. We're not making decisions for 8 billion people out of our HQ downtown. We decentralize and distribute those choices so that people can really take control of their own lives. And with machine learning, we'll figure out the best strategies together.
What is that thing people say? The love that burns the hottest only lasts half as long. Not that I was in love with Soren. I mean, we had a real connection, but I'm more talking about the whole experience. The company was growing so fast and the work was intense. That was probably the most intense period of my life, honestly. Working 16-hour days and then going out and partying and not having to worry about spending money, but also feeling like the work I was doing was really having an impact. So like, I deserve to have some fun too, right? But at a certain point, it was like, I cannot keep doing this, you know? Like, I needed to pause and reflect and ask myself, is this really what I want my life to be? And the way I think about it now is, this was a great learning experience. I learned a lot about tech, obviously, but also about myself. For one thing, I learned that I don't actually like working in tech. This was, without a doubt, one of the best work environments, but it was still such a bro culture. It just wasn't for me. I went back to grad school. I'm doing a comp lit PhD, which I know is like a long road, but I think I'd really enjoy being a professor, and it's fully funded. I already have so much debt from undergrad, like I could not take one more. I do feel a little bad. I didn't get to say a proper goodbye to Soren. He just kind of ghosted. I'd gotten a grant to go to Italy for a month, and when I came back, his house was on the market again.
I never really got a straight answer myself, but it seems like what happened was, it was actually an Uber driver told me this, so take that for what it's worth. But apparently there was another company developing a very similar app at the same time, and that company got bought by Facebook. So once Mark Zuckerberg got his teeth into it, poor Soren just got crowded out of the market. I guess that's just how things go in his world. You pour your beating heart into something and then poof. Nice young couple moved in next door. 2 kids. We say hi. Patricia still brings me the wrong mail, so I take it over. But, well, I do miss getting invited over for Scotch.
I was an excellent drinking companion.
You just heard Owner Occupy by Jonathan Spector. Directed by Taibi Magar, it starred David Patrick Kelly as Alvin, Kalyne Coleman as Mia, and David Furr as Soren.
Hi, this is Jonathan Spector. I'm the playwright.
I'm Taibi Magar. I'm directing.
Hi, this is David Furr, and I play the role of Soren.
Hi, this is Kalyne Coleman, and I played Mia.
DP can't be with us for this conversation. He had to go. Jonathan Spector, playwright. Tell us what ambergris is exactly.
So this play began, I had some rough version of this idea for a little while, but it actually began just before the pandemic, so February of 2020. I did a little sort of week-long bake-off with some other San Francisco area playwrights in which each of us contributed one ingredient to the play, and then we all wrote plays over the course of a couple of days. And the ambergris, I think that might have come from Peter Noctree as his ingredient. So I had to work various things into the play, and that was one of them.
So ambergris is to Soren what garlic is to Dracula. David, have you ever played a vampire before?
I don't think so. For some reason, if I have, it's eluding me.
From an actor's point of view, how did you approach saying, I am an excellent drinking partner 6 times?
Well, I did think it was important to have them serve different functions each time. So just going back to what Jonathan wrote and whether it's laying out this for the first time and declarative, or if it's, well, yeah, of course, I'm an excellent drinking companion. And then another time it's like something is about to go down because I'm very seductive or whatever. So just the context that Jonathan provides and trying to figure out what he might be trying to say with that.
Right. Kaylin, David, vampire stories have been especially popular with the under 30, 35 crowd on TV and cable these last years. And what do you think it is about vampires and the undead that enthralls and titillates the public now?
I was going to say immortality and then the intimacy of a vampire bite and the relationship, but that's not new. So I don't know what it is about now that makes them more popular. I don't know if they are more popular now, or maybe it's just that we have more platforms for vampires to appear on. There's countless television shows of whatever you want to make. So are they more popular now, or is it just that we have more venues by which to have them presented to us?
But let me tell you something. There is something so sexy about a vampire. And I think the fact that they live forever, I think the fact that they have the power to turn other people into vampires, that sort of intimate relationship David was talking about, that codependency is just something so curiously delicious in a probably problematic way if I really try to break it down. But I think really truly in this moment, what would draw me to a vampire story would be just wanting to escape the sort of moment that we're in and be in something that isn't necessarily rooted in reality, right? It's nice to sort of just go into a world that has the undead that feel bigger than us or older than us in a way that feels comforting, strangely.
It certainly has lasting power. Taibi, Jonathan's play, it offers a bit of horror, thriller, comedy, social political tech, vampiric and real estate satire. Which parts of that dish would you say is the play's main ingredient, and which are the side dishes, the sauce, the garnish?
That's a great question. I think I actually don't really love vampire stories, but I happened to love this one because I think just during the pandemic, I've been doing a lot of walking around my neighborhood, and I live part-time in Providence, Rhode Island, and, walking around downtown, all these small shops closing, all your favorite, locally owned, and then the luxury condo building is still going and still going and still going and is actually now completed. And I just love the use of metaphor inside of vampire to start to tackle some of these major questions about gentrification. And I just think it's an insightful, exciting, poetic way into discussing an issue that's become even closer to me.
Right. This story is a tale of down and outs, people struggling financially, of homes becoming commodities for rentals and AirBnBs, and sort of maybe making deals with the devil. And it's about choices, I presume. Everybody, which aspects were most important to you, and which lines and ideas jumped out?
From Soren's point of view, I enjoyed the section about, how there's been less violence on each other over the years, and about Jefferson and the dumbwaiter, and how I got such a kick out of, here they are vampires, and they have an enlightenment about our society that much of the rest of our society is having trouble with, about women's place in politics. And he says, that's part of what's making our society better and has a pacifying effect. And I was really struck by what Jonathan wrote about how something that held us back was the idea that if we make changes now, then it's somehow admitting that what we did before was wrong or bad, but that in this case the vampires have turned that corner or are turning that corner and saying that it shouldn't stop us from making those changes. That fear that what we did before may have been not wrong. We, devoured whole villages in one night, but we can't let that stop us from, being a better vampiric culture. And so I enjoyed that aspect of Soren saying we are bettering ourselves. We are doing something for the betterment of humanity.
One of my favorite parts was the fact that Mia knows what she wants and she knows how she plans to do it, and she's able to articulate her thoughts and really speak out. And I think that is such a beautiful thing about the newer generation, and also like something that I'm in a process of being able to do and work toward a more liberated anti-racist world. And I think the thing that's scary is that Mia gets got and doesn't even realize it, right? And I think that that's something that's like a bigger metaphor, that the work continues, that we can never think that it's done, and that we have to continue to have an analysis about everything and everyone around us so that we can learn how to love more and work toward a more loving society that has true justice. And I think Mia's journey reminds me of that.
Yeah. As the three characters are telling the tale of Soren, did you envision them as telling it aware of one another or just opposed as they all tell the same story? How did you envision it as you were writing, for example, Jonathan?
I think I was very much thinking, like some of the plays of Wallace Shawn or Conor McPherson, or, these sort of plays where, it is just sort of people telling you a story. If done well, I've seen performances that are just incredibly compelling and dramatic, even when it's just people on stage.
Yeah. The story is told by its characters. It works really so well as audio. Do you have ideas about how owner-occupy could work in other mediums?
I think preserving the sort of Greek messenger style of it feels really exciting to me. I love where things are just contained in the language. I find that restraint rather sexy. So I think I would definitely try to maintain that, because I feel like it's all about leaning in close and listening to the subtlety of the language. I don't think there's any big staging tricks that would make Jonathan's work even better. I think it's a pretty amazing kind of straightforward, great acting kind of piece.
I just want to say what an incredible pleasure and honor it was to have you all. Thank you. It's terrific. You've been listening to Playing on Air, Great American Short Plays with Great American Actors. Assistant producers, Rachel Creedberg and Adithya Pratama. Marketing and Education Manager, Shelley Horwitz. Development, Lila Becker. Assistant to the Artistic Director, Eric Judson. Theme music, Tom Cochan. Play music, Dan Moses Schreier. Recording and sound design, John Kilgore. Audio editing, Rachel Creedberg. Playing on Air is distributed by PRX, Public Radio Exchange. For Playing on Air, I'm your host, Claudia Catania. Thanks for listening.